Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 70 of the Trauma Dump Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump Podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own, and how do I support others? This week, we'll be discussing the topic of identity and community with a friend of the show and a licensed clinical therapist, Erin O'Brien. You can go follow Erin O'Brien over on Instagram. It is at DBT Center of Media. That is DBTCenterofmedia. Erin O'Brien is a Linehan Board certified dialectical behavioral therapy clinician. She is also the owner of DBT Center of Media, situated just outside of Pennsylvania. She holds a license as a professional counselor in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, and Idaho. Make sure you go check out Erin over on Instagram to support her for being on this podcast. And remember, if you'd like to share on the show, please message us in our Discord in the podcast participants channel along with your unique experiences, and we will match you to the right episode. And just a quick disclaimer before we start, though we are interviewing a licensed health professional, I am not one. This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these topics that are so often overlooked and extremely misunderstood. If you or a loved one are in need of medical professional help, we have so many different resources in our descriptions. The topics discussed here are for a mature audience, so viewer discretion is always advised. And if you're liking what we're doing here on the Trauma Dump Podcast, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content. We post new episodes every Sunday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. And if you like this show so much, please share it with your friends and comment down below what episodes you'd like to see from us here on the Trauma Dump Podcast. All right, let's get into this episode. Okay. Hello, Erin. Welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back. Thank you for having me again.
Yes. So last we had you on, we spoke about, we talked about dialectical behavioral therapy one time, and then another time about your own personal life experiences. And today we're going to be talking about identity and community.
Mm-hmm.
We got to give those disclaimers at the top of the show. I'm not a licensed health professional, but Erin is.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't take whatever I say as gospel or as truth. I'm just a person who has experienced trauma, and this is a way where we can share and talk openly and honestly, and we're all fallible people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to still be able to share. Are you comfortable with discussing these topics in your personal experiences today?
Yes, I am.
Okay. To make sure I'm not crossing any of your boundaries and respecting your experiences, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. We can also take a break. And if you don't feel like answering a question, just let me know. I'll skip it. Because my priority is to make sure that you feel safe and comfortable at all times.
Awesome.
So, Erin, for those that don't know you, can you give like a little background on who you are and what you specialize in?
Sure. So I have a license in professional counseling, and I've been a licensed therapist for over 10 years. I have my license in the state of Pennsylvania, but I also got my license in Virginia, Delaware, and Idaho. Um, Idaho seems a little random until you realize that there's not many therapists that have a DBT certification in Idaho, at least not that I found through the Linehan Institute. And so I got my license in Idaho. I provide all those services virtually, and I've been in my own private practice now for just a little over 2 years. And I think actually when we recorded the first episode that I was on, I didn't have my Linehan certification yet in DBT, but I did get that in between that first and the second episode that I was on. So I have a DBT certification which is, was something really important to me as somebody who also had been through a lot of therapy and who also had been through specifically DBT. So, and if you don't know what DBT is, it stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy. It's very skills based. I love it, obviously, if I'm doing it. So,
Obviously. I mean, I think it's really, really cool. And for those of you guys that want to check out that episode, we'll have the link in the description. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can click right over here and you can watch that and then come back here afterward.
mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what identity means to you?
Sure. I mean, that I think, is always such a broad question. And it's something, that I have been thinking, I think, a lot about lately, especially in terms of DBT and a lot of the things that are happening in our world. How do we have identity? What contributes to identity? I found that for a lot of people coming to see me for DBT, and specific people that may have borderline personality disorder, but not just limited to that, that there is a lot of difficulty with knowing who you are. And I think as somebody who grew up being a parentified child, so a child who had to be an adult very young, that my sense of identity was more slowly evolving than maybe other people. A large part of my identity was as being a caregiver. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I realized, if somebody asked me, who are you? What's important to you? What are you interested in? I wouldn't know exactly what to say. So I took a lot of time, to just try out different interests and see what stuck. And I had been doing pottery, but I got into photography and specifically film. And so a big part of my identity is creativity. And that's one of the ways that I survived a lot of the things that I experienced growing up and even as an adult is through creative outlets. A lot of people don't know, or maybe I might probably said it in one of the other episodes, but my background is actually also in fine art. And so for me, like being a therapist is one aspect of that identity. It's my job. It's also something important to me, but it's not all that I am. I'm also a creative person. I don't want to say artist because I feel like that feels I don't know, like a strange way to say it, but I'm creative. I'm an aunt, I'm a friend. And I think also identity to me is how you feel connected to yourself, and the ways that you show up for yourself. And that to me comes back to what do you find important and valuable? And to me, a lot of things that I find important and valuable kind of cross over both between, I think, who I am as a therapist and who I am as a person, which tends to include a lot of social justice issues. And those things are important to me in both the work that I do and as an individual. So,
I think that's a very beautiful, well-rounded answer. And I think it's very interesting for me because especially coming as like a traumatized person or someone who's experienced trauma, their trauma really becomes their identity for a very long time.
mhm, yeah.
And asking you as a therapist, how does someone prevent their trauma from encompassing all of their life?
Yeah. And that right there, I think, again, is another really important question. Um, I think to me, the first part is recognizing when you don't feel like your identity is clear to you. Because to me, that's who it matters to the most, is how I see myself. And as somebody who also has trauma, I think when you go through enough treatment over time, sometimes we start to just identify with a diagnosis. And I'm not saying that a diagnosis isn't important. I just feel that we are more than that, right? You are more than that as an individual. And as somebody who's been through a lot of treatment and came out on the other side and is now doing less in terms of treatment, I felt like there was a gap. I already had gone and resolved a lot of things. I did EMDR for my own trauma. And if you don't know what that is, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's a very long, very long explanation for that. But EMDR was something that really helped me. And I think once I felt like I had gotten to a point in my life where I felt more stable and consistent, I wanted to spend more time getting to know who I was. And that can be scary, I think, for a lot of people, because one, it means you're trying out different things and some of that may not work out. Two, there's vulnerability because you may be opening yourself up to criticism or, meeting new people, which a lot of people find hard. And I did struggle with that. And it can feel really difficult to push yourself to try new things, especially as somebody when you've been through trauma who's maybe very fearful of that change. And so I think therapy is a big part of kind of unpacking some of the layers of trauma. And then to me, from DBT, a lot of radical acceptance that there are things that have happened that I cannot change. And I'm accepting of those things. And I recognize that I have an opportunity in front of me to possibly change how things go for me in the future, and what would I want that life to look like?
That's really beautifully put. I want to go off of what you said about how sometimes a diagnosis can become a really big part of your identity. And I
Mhm.
think for myself, that was true for a while. When I first got diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder after my dad was hit by a car and then all the subsequent trauma that incurred after that, my therapist, who is also a psychologist, was like, "You do not have PTSD. I'm upgrading your diagnosis." And I was like, "Upgrading it? What?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's now complex."
Right.
And I tried to ask her, I was like, "Okay, what's the difference? What's the difference?" She's like, "Well, there isn't the biggest difference. It's just one incident happening after another, happening after another, happening after another. And so you're not getting the time to process the
Right.
individual traumas and heal. You're
Mhm.
just getting re-traumatized, re-traumatized, re-traumatized. And it might take
Mhm.
you a lot longer to heal."
Right. Right.
And that really struck a chord with me of, oh, that's why. That's why I feel like there's something wrong with me. Why can't I just get over this? Is because there isn't just like one thing, one instance. There's multiple instances that when I'm trying to process it, something else happens, and then I don't have the chance. And it's
Right.
been, a couple years since my father has passed away. And I feel like I'm finally catching up with myself. And I no
Mhm.
longer identify as a severely traumatized person. And
Sure.
that's really freeing. Even though I
Mhm.
know, yes, I do still have significant trauma. And if I see like a dad on the street be really sweet to his daughter, I immediately start crying. But
Mhm.
I can appreciate that grief now instead of feeling anger or resentment of, oh, I don't have my dad anymore. Oh, I can't have an interaction like that. I can be like, I feel this grief because I had that before and I am happy for that little girl. And also, I can also appreciate that envy that I might have and
Sure.
allow it to exist in the same space.
Right.
And I have been going on this journey of making new friends and building my community. And I think because I know myself more and I understand myself more, it's become a lot easier for me to know other people and understand other people and try to invest in other
Sure.
people more. And
Right.
that's where I want to ask you about community. Like, how does self-acceptance play in building a community and allowing you to comprehend other people and their experiences?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I try to impart to a lot of the individuals that I work with, um, is that community has become a concept I think that is rarer and rarer in the world. And I think the more that you watch things unfold as they have been in, our news and particularly our country, we are recognizing just how important community is and how many people, one, don't have it, or two, don't even know what it is. And so one of the things I think about when I think of community is you are an individual in a community, right? So you have yourself, and who you are, your identity is part of who you show up as in that community. And that identity can cause harm to other people, depending on certain perspectives or opinions or the way that we interact with others. Even not intentionally, we can sometimes cause harm, right? People can be, I call it covertly invalidating, meaning they don't intend to invalidate you, but somehow the actions or the words that they use still are invalidating, right? Those two things can exist at the exact same time. Currently in my community, I'm also a dog sitter. And so I have a little furry friend with me who likes to make an appearance on the podcast. But anyhow, that was a different segue. So the idea of community, when you have identity, is I think about what skills do you have as a person? For example, do you know how to handle conflict with others? Are you able to sit with people in conflict and problem solve and try to reach a resolution without, let's say, name calling or belittling or shutting down and walking away? A lot of people struggle with that. They don't even like the word conflict. They see it as inherently negative. When you think about as an individual, do you have the capacity to show up for other people? And that's not a knock, because sometimes we may not, based on where we are in life. You could be somebody with a disability, somebody who has a chronic health issue, and that can sometimes impact how you are able to show up for others. And then I understand in a broader sense is that there are so many ways for us to be an active member of a community. That doesn't just have to be things that you would do physically or even things you can do financially. So the more I learn about that, the more I understand that identity and community are intertwined, right? And a lot of people think of identity, I think, as just qualities and things that interest you. And it is those things, but it's also how you show up and interact with others. Have you done any work to heal your own trauma? Have you done any work to heal anger or deep shame that you might carry, or guilt? And that to me is always a place to start, because those things, as we know, will continue to come up again and again, and it impacts you and your community. In DBT, we talk about that there is a transactional nature that is inherent to life. And that means I am impacted by the environment and people in it, and vice versa. They are impacted by me. And so when we think about that right now, it feels to me like a lot of the current, I guess you could say, vibe is, what do I need? What do I need? What do I need? And not maybe including, does this impact a broader community? How does what I do or what I don't do impact other people and the way that I'm able to show up and provide care to them?
That's a really good point to mention. And also, being disabled in some sense can also impact the way that you show up for other people.
Right.
Because that really happened with me.
Yeah.
As I had seizures. I haven't had one in a while, which has been awesome.
That's
But
great.
it is so great. But I have a service dog, Gigi, who detects those seizures. And so, me going out in public with my friends, I did notice some of them, not all of them, but some of them did feel insecure about that, or felt like they were being judged by others because of me having a service animal, which was really interesting to unpack with them. About how one girl asked me one time, she was like, "Do you really need to bring Gigi everywhere with you?" And I'm like, "Yeah. I mean, I can try to go without her, but do you feel comfortable with calling 911 if I have a seizure? Do you feel comfortable with holding me down if I might bite myself or hurt myself or bite my tongue? Can you put something in my mouth?" Like, that's a lot of responsibility
Yep.
that's going to be put on you. And she was like, "Well, I've never seen you have a seizure, so I didn't know like they were still occurring. I was like, I don't know when they're gonna happen. That's like the
Right.
whole point.
It would be convenient if you did know, right? So you could put it on like your calendar and kind of plan around it, like on a Google schedule or something, you know?
Yeah, that would be so great. Honestly, that would be
Right.
awesome. I wish my body was a machine and worked like that and gave me updates and let me know.
Right.
Like I wish that was how it worked. And
Mhm.
like we had that conversation. She's like, "Well, I thought you were getting medicines. I thought you said you got injections that were preventing seizures." And I was like, "Yeah, but also the caveat of not everything's going to work 100%
Right.
either. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be under so much duress that my body can't take it. That's what triggers them."
Sure.
And we kept having that discussion, and eventually she just stopped talking to me. She just
Mm.
stopped wanting to be around me, wanting to be near me. And I found out through the grapevine that her like perception of me was that I was over exaggerating my symptoms to get sympathy or something like that, some kind of
Mm.
points or something
Sure.
like that with the friend group. And I had another friend like bring it up to me and be like, "Hey, I don't know if it's necessarily rumors, but she's spreading kind of misinformation about you." And I don't know how to broach it with her and like tell her that's not okay.
Mhm.
And that was really, really interesting that that friend came to me. And like it gave me pause of being like, okay, why does this person feel so comfortable discussing these medical issues? And then I'm
Right.
like, oh, I need to have more boundaries within myself and not oversharing what I'm going through because they're not doctors. They don't really understand. And misinformation could be spread about me. And I think that's also interesting within community is finding the people that actually support you
Right.
and want to know you
Mhm.
versus the people that may be around you because that transactional thing that you're talking about, there's something
Sure.
that they can get from you or from the
Right.
relationship.
Right. And we think about like, I taught a lot of the clients that I have, not everybody that's in the community is necessarily your friend. And that doesn't automatically mean that they're not in the community. It just means that in terms of, I guess you could say, proximity between myself and that person, there's more distance. So while I may not call on them for emotional support, they still exist somehow within the community because they know other people, they live near me, or something along those lines. And this to me again is how do we practice confronting people in a way when we feel that they have done harm? How do we approach them and say, hey, like I understand, perhaps you had questions or concerns about, my medical condition, and I would appreciate it if you would talk to me directly. Um, a lot of the time we don't do those things. We kind of ignore it. And I get it because it's uncomfortable. And then that just creates, I think, further divide. As a therapist, I was thinking about it lately. I was like, well, when I used to teach the interpersonal effectiveness skills in my skills groups, we would focus on a part where how do you make new friends? And I said, I really need to expand this idea because it goes beyond friends anymore. And when DBT was originally conceived, right, we're talking in the 70s, it was a very different sense of community. I grew up in the 90s. It was a very different sense of community from what we have today. And we could look at different factors, what led to this kind of breakdown, in communication and having connection with people. In some ways, again, I don't want to be the adult in the room that's like, well, your cell phone is bad and social media is bad. But I do think that those things are a factor, and our reliance on them to build connection versus having people we see in person or we can talk to even on the phone. Um, but I said to myself, a couple months ago, I was like, I would feel like a terrible therapist if I didn't start to talk more about community and what does that include with clients, because as the world continues to evolve, we are going to need each other more and more. And I always point out, like, if you look at the recent hurricanes that we had right in the South, in Florida and I believe North Carolina, when those things happened, if you looked on the news, a lot of just, I want to say regular, but regular people, right? Your neighbors, were coming down and delivering like goods and food and raising money and getting it right into the hands of people who needed it. And that is community, right? That was a need that was very clearly happening. And people like you and I were the ones that answered that need. And that to me is a great example of why we need community. You know, as someone who lives in an area where most of my family is at least 2 hours away, I always think, well, if I fell down and like broke my leg and I had to go to the emergency room, who would be there? Because they could come for sure, but it would take at least 2 hours to get to me. So that tells me right there, I need to have other people in my community that I can support and they can support me. And so that was a very important thing for me to realize because it pushed me to start, one, getting to know my neighbors. You know, I ask a lot of people in the group, do you even know the first name of any of your neighbors? And most people are like, not really. And I said, that's kind of a problem. You know, I'm not asking you to get to know them so you can have them over for dinner or barbecue or something, but just to know who the people are that you are surrounded by in your vicinity, I think is an important thing. Um, you know, and I think when we talk about community, it's like, what does this include? And when we look at the hurricanes, right, I'm talking about things like mutual aid. You know, if you haven't heard of mutual aid groups, they're wonderful. They're usually just run by volunteers. Someone in the community has a need, they can't make rent because they had a medical issue. They can help raise money to help cover rent for someone. They do clothing drives. There's a lot of ones that I have become connected to in Pennsylvania and have even considered starting one in the county I live in. But I'm also thinking like in terms of community with things like gardens, food pantries. You know, there are an unbelievable number of people that need access to those things because they cannot afford it. And to get some of the benefits that you need for food, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. And so if we think about cutting out some of the middleman, right, and making it so that people can get access to those things, that means community.
That's beautiful. And yeah, with the hurricanes, my uncle, one of my uncles, I have several, he actually flew down to either flew or drove to North Carolina and started helping them because he knows how to operate heavy machinery. He started helping them like chainsaw down the trees and then move them like off the roads. And he just felt called. He was like, I got to go do it. I got to go help. Didn't ask for money, didn't ask for favors because he felt compelled. And it was really the way that my family members were raised, the way that I was raised is like community was super important.
Mhm.
And I noticed the lack of community in my age group. And it makes me really devastated. Like
Sure.
genuinely it does. I grew up never knowing a stranger. That was how my dad was. That's how his dad was. Like we grew up wanting to meet everybody. You always said hi to the checkout counter person. You asked them their name, you asked them how their day was, and you actually meant it when you're asking.
Right.
It's not just like a courtesy.
Mhm.
It's like you talk with them. That's why I love the checkouts. I hate the little automatic checkout now that's in every
Right.
store where you just scan your own items because I'm like,
Right.
I'm missing that human interaction. And I know
Right.
some people are going to be like, you're weird. Thank you. Yes, I am weird.
Well, but I think a lot of people do not realize just how much that is impacting their mental health. I mean, we can look at a whole host of reasons, right? You can look at relationships you have, lack of relationships. You can look at having anxiety, depression, you know, chronic illness, and those are all very valid reasons that struggle with mental health. But I also have noticed, let's say, for example, in October, I had the highest number of referrals I've ever had in my whole career. And I think the reason is because people are feeling panicked. And my friend decided to join us, part of the community. This is Jackson.
Oh, hello, Jackson.
um, he looks like he's ready to talk into the microphone. But when I noticed that happening, I thought about it, I was like, I mean, it could just be a fluke, but in my opinion, it is most likely because people are realizing, right, I need to get help. And that's an opportunity for us to start helping them figure out, how do I heal some of the things that I've experienced? How do I develop sharper skills for communication and navigating conflict so that I can build community? Um, and I noticed that for a lot of people too, I think there's an increased sense of hopelessness because every day we are being confronted with more and more horrific things in the world. And people I don't know always put together that community is a big answer to that feeling of hopelessness. In DBT, we think about when you have tried and, let's say, successfully resolved some of the things that are coming up for you, your struggles. What do you replace that with? What does that time get devoted to? And that to me is a great jumping off point for building identity and community.
That's I heard the puppy. It's so cute. That's it's really interesting that you point that out. I want to ask you about identity when it comes to people who are struggling with depression
Mm-hmm.
and they feel like they no longer know themselves. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what role do you think self-acceptance plays in identity?
I think so. When I think of acceptance, right, I think of acknowledgement and I think of acknowledging, aspects of my experience that I can't necessarily change. And that's usually things like my past. I can't change that. You can't go back and change mistakes that we feel that we have made, or take opportunities that we didn't take at a certain point. And the things that we can change are typically what I have right now in this moment. So that means learning ways to navigate, like, how do I, if possible, build connections with people? How do I find a community, even if it's, it starts out online? How do I build up a sense of connection with people? And that can be very healing. I also think about how acceptance that there are going to be realistic limitations for anybody, right? And those things can be, your physical health can sometimes be a limitation for people if you have chronic health issues. Finances, right, can certainly be a limitation for people at different points in their life. Having access to transportation, right, can be a limitation that can impact, right, people getting to and from therapy, or even going into the community to meet others. So we look at all those different factors, right? And I think there's some acceptance of the things, again, we can't change. And how do I try and change some of the things that I could? It's not an easy thing to do, at all. And that's another thing is I think there's a lot of resources out there that people don't know about because we don't talk about it enough. For example, like in Pennsylvania, if you have Medicare, you can get, or at least you used to be able to get, reduced membership to places like the YMCA. If you were on Medicaid, so like our medical assistance, you can get reduced fare on our transportation, so SEPTA. And a lot of people don't know those things, I think, because it's not like it's widely advertised, but that could make a huge difference to someone who is, has a minimal income and still needs to be able to, let's say, get to work or get to appointments. A lot of caseworkers, case managers, or social workers can know those resources, but even then, people don't know the full scope of what's available. And that's why I come back to that idea of community is how can people let others know, like, hey, like, I know you're struggling with this. Maybe I can help. This is something that I could do. How might they show up for me?
And that's a really good point to make as well. When I was really struggling like 2 years ago, there's a system in place here in the DFW area called Metro Care, which
Mm-hmm.
DFW in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. And
Mm-hmm.
Metro Care provides like free doctor's appointments and dentist appointments and like healthcare referrals, all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And it was a huge resource. And I found it out through one of my uncles who's a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I'm struggling. I don't have any health insurance. I don't have anything. He's like, okay, go to MetroCare and get
Sure.
yourself an appointment. You may have to wait there for a couple hours, but you can
Mm-hmm.
do it. You can do it.
Right.
And I did. And once I told the lady my situation, she got me with a counselor and then also someone who is like, okay, you need resources. I'm a resource manager. Let's find you some resources. And actually,
Mhm.
that lady contacted me recently and was like, hey, it's just checking in to see, do you have all your resources that you need? Is there anything that I can help you, like food pantry wise? Are you doing
Mhm.
okay? And I'm like, first and foremost, thank you for calling me. I'm doing so much better. You can take me off whatever list. I just want to show
Yeah.
some gratitude to you for reaching out to me. And she was like, you're welcome. I'm so glad you're doing so much better. And then she hung up. So I'm really glad that that's out there. There are resources out
Yeah.
there. Again, like you said, most of us don't know when you're
Mhm.
struggling, don't know where to turn to, where to go. And I
Right.
think another big factor is the way our society views
Mhm.
those of us going through trauma as
Right.
burdens to the community.
Sure. Or people who, frankly, do not have the same advantages as everybody else. We talk about privilege, like that is an important aspect of identity and community. And we think about like, okay, if you have the means, what can you do with those means to uplift other people? I feel as a person, part of my identity is I feel that that is a requirement for me because of the fact that I have different privileges. And, to me, that can mean donating money, financially to organizations, mutual aid groups, volunteering, spreading awareness of things, offering low cost therapy to people, getting them connected with resources, doing the legwork to find the resources for them. To me, it feels like such an important part of being a person, but also as a therapist and somebody with privilege. How do I do that? Because we also look at people who, have struggled, who even now are unhoused. We look at them as a burden rather than, I think, looking at people and saying, like, wow, like, I can't imagine what it's like to be in that person's position. What could I do to be supportive? How might I be able to offer help?
And that's really something super sweet. How can I help in a way that's
Mhm.
within my capacity
Sure.
and also capabilities?
Mhm.
I think ways that everyone can help is by showing kindness to others. When you're on the street and you see someone I know, like, there's like that thing of like, don't smile at a random man as a woman, like that could be
Mhm.
dangerous. But if you are in a grocery store and you see someone smiling and nodding at them can mean all the difference. I mean, for
Mhm.
me, whenever I'm walking past someone and someone smiles at me, I get so happy. I'm like, oh my gosh, you notice I exist? Like euphoric, honestly. And
Mhm.
I also want to circle back to what you were saying about a lot of people don't know their own neighbors. That was something
Mhm.
that we moved to our duplex in March of this year. And that was something that I made damn well sure that I did, was that all my neighbors on my street, I said hello to them. Because they're in a duplex, I share half a house with another person. My neighbor Tracy, I text her all the time. I check in with her. We have lunch sometimes. I bring her cookies. Like, I love Tracy. My neighbors over there don't like me. I don't know why. They don't like
Mhm.
me, but I'm always nice to them anytime we come out. Their kids play in my front yard. I don't care. It's just like I try very
Right.
hard to be nice to them. They came over one time asking for sugar. I'm like, here you go. Here's sugar. Like,
Right.
trying to be there for them. And
Mhm.
something that was crazy cool is I go to the dog park every single day, every morning, and I have all those people that I know, and I got their phone numbers for one reason or another. And they noticed that I wasn't at the dog park for 2 weeks. And a lot of them contacted me and they're like, hey, are you okay? Is everything all right? We
Mhm.
haven't seen you in a while. And that meant a lot to me because I wasn't there because my service dog
Right.
Gigi got attacked on our
Right. Right.
walk.
Mhm.
And they were like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And they donated to her GoFundMe. Didn't ask them to. They
Right.
found it on my Instagram and they donated. And we got to go to the dog park for the first time today. And everybody was so happy to see Gigi and Mochi. And it was just, that's a little community within itself. Like the only time I see
Mhm.
these people, which all of them are much older than me, they're all in their 40s, 50s, 60s, because I go to the dog park early in the morning. But
Mhm.
it felt like a community within itself because they cared about me. They wanted to make sure I was okay. And then they gave their resources to make sure Gigi was okay too and was well taken
Sure.
care of. And
Yeah.
that meant a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think a great example of community is when people, even if you're not friends with someone, they notice your absence because you go to the same spots on a daily basis. We think about that proximity factor. And even the fact that they're willing, and able and more than happy to donate money because they know that that could be a very difficult financial strain for you, when a dog needs medical care. Um, I think that's a great example of community.
I think so too. And another thing that was also really crazy is I went to go get my oil changed, and the guy changing my oil, he asked, for my address to put on the sheet. And he's like, "Oh, you live on this street? I live on this street too." He's like, "I know this is a weird question to ask, but are you the girl that walks the dog with the pink tail?" I'm like, "Yes, I am. I am that girl that walks the dog with the pink tail." And he was like, "Oh my gosh, my wife sees your dog all the time, takes a picture of her every time she sees her. It delights, makes her so happy every time she sees your dog with a pink tail." I'm like, I'm glad I could give some joy
That's so
in my
cool.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad. And it's really cool. I want to ask you, like, for those of us wanting to find a community and they don't know how to go about that, what would you advise them to do?
So I think to me, I always start with asking myself or asking anybody, what is your capacity at this moment? And that's not a concept I think that's set in stone. Capacity changes over time. But right now, what is your capacity? Like, how much time and energy do you have to be able to build community? What are your needs? What do you need from a sense of community? Are you looking for more companionship? Are you looking more to get involved and support others? Are you looking because you need access to resources? Maybe it's a combination of those reasons. But what is it from your life that you feel is missing from community? And then I think about like all the different ways that you can go about, I guess, answering those needs. So, for example, there's a lot of free support groups out there for different things that you can join. We talk about churches. You don't even have to necessarily be religious in order to go to a church. And they even have resources usually. In the town that I live in, they have this thing called a free store that's connected with one of the local churches. Everything in it is free. And I almost went in there one time thinking, like, is there like a catch to this? And there's not. It's just free stuff. Um, they also do a food pantry. And I think that that's really amazing. You can volunteer at places like that. You can volunteer at animal shelters. Now, again, that depends on your capacity. Like if you're somebody, let's say, that's kind of more homebound because you have different, maybe a disability or some other reason why you couldn't, I think then, okay, virtually, how do we build community? There's a lot of book clubs that you can find that meet virtually and have been since the pandemic started. You can even think about taking a class. Like there are classes that meet online. And again, some of this is free and some of this depends on cost. But there's a lot of different ways, I think, to figure that out. And even just asking people around you, hey, like, are you involved with anything that you really enjoy doing? And maybe you go and you try it out. I never knew if I'd be interested in pottery until a couple of years ago when someone pointed me in the direction of the art center that I go to. It's a community art center. And they do a lot of nice things, where they do summer camp for kids and stuff. And so I'll go there and do pottery classes. And I know that, the money that I pay to do pottery classes makes a difference for other people as well in the community. So I think to me, it's also how much do you want to try new things? Because for a lot of people, I also like to remind them you aren't obligated to do any of it, right? You don't have to go and build identity. You don't have to go and, build community. You don't have to do those things. It's just something that may be beneficial. And sometimes I think people feel pressure to do different things. And that in itself, I think, would backfire, where you would, really struggle with getting yourself out there and connected to other people.
Yeah, and that's a very good point to make, because something that my dog just yawned so cute. Something that I really had trouble understanding for a while was that I'm gonna be married to an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
My fiance Joey doesn't have a lot of very close friends, but he has a lot of acquaintances.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, his favorite time is just to get home and relax and play his video games alone and have alone time to recharge.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I recharge by meeting people and hugging people and being around people and talking and interacting.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, he's a listener, loves to
Mm-hmm.
listen, loves to, be in the room, but doesn't always have a lot of, you know, interjection, anything to add to the conversation.
Right.
And that was really hard for me to comprehend for the first year of our relationship of, why don't you talk more? Why don't you interact more? And he's like, I am interacting. I'm listening. I'm here. I'm
Mm-hmm.
present. I just don't have anything to say. And
Right.
that's still valid. And it took
Mm-hmm.
me some maturing to do to recognize that, yeah, that's still valid. The way he
Right.
shows up is still okay. It's
Right.
not the way that I would show up, but that doesn't make it any less valid or any
Right.
less helpful.
Or even less net needing of community. Because I
Hmm.
find that everybody is different, right? Like even people who are introverted, we still need community. And that's coming from someone who is actually more introverted. Is, I do value the time that I have to myself, and I recognize that I don't want to do everything alone. That took me a lot of time, I think, in identity building as an adult to realize that you can have both things. You can have time to yourself and still set aside time to be with other people. And again, asking yourself, what is my capacity in a very realistic sense? Some days there's going to be days where I'm much more excited to go and be around other people. And then there's going to be periods where I'm not. And in those moments, I think it's okay to sometimes take a step back, and there's still ways to participate in your community.
Mm. Have you witnessed or experienced moments where a community empowered someone to embrace their true self?
I think so, for sure. A lot of the time, well, as a therapist, I can say I've been doing group therapy for also over 10 years. And I've noticed even in therapy groups, people tend to empower each other. They tend to talk a lot about, communal struggles. And then they also talk about like the ways that they have coped with it. And that is one of the reasons why I like group therapy, is because it builds connection with people. People can be very vulnerable in a group setting, and that in turns inspires other people to also be vulnerable. And sometimes those people don't have anywhere else that they can be that vulnerable. And so when you're able to do that in a group and you get support and you see that people, are listening and acknowledging and validating, that's very healing. I think one of our needs as people is to be acknowledged. We are also, as Brené Brown, I believe, says, we are hardwired for connection. Whether we're introverted or not, we are so hardwired to need other people. And I think as somebody who tends to also be very independent, I've started to realize it's probably, well, not just probably, it is okay and necessary for me to ask other people to help me with things, and that I don't need to do everything on my own. Um, I always see those memes where like, people carrying like a washer and dryer up a flight of stairs on their back, and they're like, your therapist says that this is a trauma response. And I'm like, they're not lying, right? Is that trying to do everything on our own can be a trauma response. And so for me, and I think a lot of other people, it's realizing how do I ask for help? What are the skills that I can use to do that?
I think what I really struggled with was asking for help once I had been rejected so many times
Sure.
because of the trauma that I endured. Before the significant trauma, it was really easy for me to ask for help, and it was really easy for me to handle rejection because my dad would tell me all the time, he's like, a no is not really a rejection, it's a redirection. The worst thing anybody can tell you is no. If you ask, you'll still be in the same situation you were in before. Just look at it that way. And
Mhm.
then once I had gone through trauma of losing my dad, losing my grandfather, losing my papa, losing my ESA cat that lived with me, becoming
Mhm.
homeless, it was like, how do I ask for help when I am so burdened that a lot of people don't know how to help me, or I don't even know what I need to ask for? And
Mhm.
it was very paralyzing, that fear of rejection, because it was like, well, if they reject me, then I can't really be around them anymore at all. I'm even more of a burden to them. Like, seeing me
Mhm.
will be that reminder of rejection, or me seeing
Right.
them will be that reminder of rejection. And it became very isolating.
Mhm.
What would you say to someone who has found themselves in that loop of rejection after rejection when they try to seek help and
Mhm.
now they don't know what to do?
Sure. And that in itself can be a trauma, right? Is when you seek help and you get rejected. I guess part of me would wonder is where are the places that we're going to seek help? Because I know, for example, a lot of community mental health centers are completely overrun with people seeking help, let's say for their mental health or even needing a case manager. Wait lists can be excruciatingly long, and that in itself is a problem, right? And that's not one that I myself have the entire answer to right now, but I do know, for example, if you were trying to get help with your mental health, it is a struggle, right, to find somebody that can help you and is qualified. But that's also, I think, that sense of community. And so, for example, if we're talking about, like, I've asked people I thought were friends, like for help with this or that, and they said no, that can be really challenging, right? We talk about in DBT, like identifying certain factors of how or to know when to make a request to someone. Timing, capacity, does this person have the ability to do the thing you're asking them to do? I think about, when we go through grief and people will say things like, well, reach out if you need anything. And I realize like how broad that question is, because it's like, well, but what does anything include? And people, in my opinion, are less likely to reach out because they don't know what your capacity is. You've left the door kind of wide open. So what I realized is it is more impactful when someone's struggling, if you want to help them, to tell them specifically what that could include. So if you want, me to watch the kids for like a couple hours, if you want me to walk your dog today, if you need me to bring groceries to you, if you want me to swing by and pick up medication and bring it to you, what are ways that you can specifically do that? So I think what I'm trying to say is it is both the person needing the support. Where are we going to do that? Because maybe we need to vary the resources that we might be using to ask for support. And two, the people who maybe are out there listening who want to give more support is how do you be more direct in what you can provide? I think sometimes we say those things like, oh, let me know if you need anything because we want to be nice, which is great. But are you at capacity? Are you able to show up for that person in the ways that they may need you? Or is there a different way that you might support them that fits with what you can provide? In a realistic sense, when we talk about making requests in DBT, I always stress to people the importance of being specific in those things too. Because sometimes, we kind of beat around the bush, so to speak, and say, like, oh, I just need this, when really we might need much more, but we don't feel comfortable being direct and asking for it, right? And that again could be for various reasons. But I think being able, so looking at the different places where you might be able to ask for support, even beyond, let's say, friends and family, and even then for people out there who want to be more supportive of others, what is your capacity? How could you show up for others?
And that's really beautiful, to be direct in what you're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I have been trying to practice within my friend group that I'm building.
Mm-hmm.
I made a promise to myself before Thanksgiving, before Friendsgiving. I was like, I am going to make my own friend group.
Mm-hmm.
And I told that to my fiance, Joey. I was like, Joey, it's going to happen. I'm manifesting it. And he's like, okay. And so I literally went out to different stores and I talked to the people working at those stores. They were my favorite stores, Hobby Lobby,
Mm-hmm.
Joann's. And I
Mm-hmm.
found two people that I thought looked really cool. And I was like, hey, do you want to be friends? And they were like, sure. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm gonna invite you to my Friendsgiving party. And they were both like, okay, I'll come. What do you want me to bring?
Oh,
And
wow.
then I found people at markets. I made friends with other vendors and then with customers that liked my booth. And I was like, you are coming to my Friendsgiving party. What do you want to bring? And I brought forth a group of 11 people that had not met each other before, had only known me from meeting me once. And I made a friend group and we had Friendsgiving together and it was freaking awesome. And then we had another, no, we had Halloween first. Pardon, I misspoke. We had Halloween party first where we all dressed up, became friends. And then we had Friendsgiving. And
Mm-hmm.
we're planning a whole Christmas party as well called Craftmas, where everyone brings a craft that they want the whole group to do. And it's awesome. And I built it. And I feel so proud of myself. And now they're becoming friends with each other and talking to each other and like
Mm-hmm.
hanging out with each other without me. And I'm like, yes, I have brought forth more community. And it makes me so happy. And if I can do it, the listeners, you guys can do it too. We were
Right.
capable of doing it. It takes
Mm-hmm.
effort, it takes consistency, but it's so
Mm-hmm.
freaking worth it. And it makes me so happy and so proud. And I've asked each and every person, like, hey, when you want to hang out, when you want to do stuff, I'm going to do stuff with one of the girls that I met as a vendor at a market tomorrow.
Ooh.
And I'm so excited. And I asked her, I was like, how do you like to show up as a friend? And what do you need from a friend? And she was like, can you specify that? I was like, oh, yeah. Okay. Me as a friend, I like quality time and I like being with my friends, just doing random stuff. We can be doing two different things, but if we're in the same room together, that's awesome. Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be talking. We can be doing two different things. It's just vibes. And she's like, I love having shared experiences with friends and going out and doing things. I was like, okay, would you like a shared experience this weekend? She's like, yeah, let's go to the mall. We're gonna go to the mall tomorrow.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yes, it is so exciting. I am so excited. And it feels so fulfilling because now I have someone that's my age that I
Mm-hmm.
can build a friendship with and maybe one day rely on. Because that's another thing. I'm getting married soon. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people put so much emphasis on your best man, your maid of honor, your bridesmaids. And when I was looking at like the list of people that I have, I was like, oh, I don't know if I have people that I would trust with the responsibility of a bridesmaid.
Mm-hmm.
And my fiance told me the same thing. He's like, we got our brothers. Obviously, they get to be groomsmen, but I don't have anybody I can trust with that responsibility. And I feel like society puts too much emphasis on having a lot of bridesmaids or a lot of groomsmen or a lot of people at your disposal to celebrate you.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to know your thoughts on that of why does society um, make it so that if you have a lot of friends, you're seen as popular, and popularity is really what, the internet is striving for, even with
Mm-hmm.
followers and stuff like that.
Sure. I mean, I guess, well, because we look at it as part of our value and our self-worth is based on like how many friends you have, or I guess how many followers you have. And to me, that's a really, I guess, poor way of measuring value and self-worth, because people are going to come and go from your life for different reasons. And, social media is what it is. Are those people that follow you really your friends, or are they just people that follow you on the internet? But when we talk about like ways of showing up for people in a community, it's not just about friendship. It's about the people, I guess, that that, live near you or work with you or go to places that you frequent. And having a community is, again, your identity. And so we talk about self-worth. Is our self-worth contingent on the amount of people we know? Or would we even say, like, it's not even contingent really on the people that we know, or the depth, I guess you could say, of those relationships? Um, I think that self-worth and value encompasses many different things. And really, how you show up and support others, how you support yourself, is very indicative in our self-worth and our value.
That's a very good point. Um, our way of seeing, honestly, it feels like a pyramid scheme in a way of
Mhm.
like a lot of how a lot of people perceive another person's value or even their own value. And it makes me think of like patriarchy and
Mhm.
how a lot of us are constantly at war with each other to fit in or to be better than or to
Sure.
be perceived as better than. When it comes to young men, because I keep hearing and I keep witnessing that young men there's an epidemic of lonely young men,
Mhm.
and they don't know where to turn to and they don't know why they're lonely. I think the biggest issue from what I'm seeing is they don't have people that they can look up to and hold them accountable. And they don't have, that male role model that they strive to be like.
Mhm.
And there's really been, especially with COVID and that isolation, there's been a lack of community-based like football and little league and baseball and
Mhm.
soccer. And so a lot of these kids and young men especially are really disadvantaged because they don't have those group dynamics where they can be with others and learn from each other and grow alongside
Mhm.
each other. And it
Yeah.
makes me very sad because I've also seen within my own community that it's becoming less and less of a normality of having after school clubs or having after school anything. Everybody wants to just get home and
Right.
be on the internet.
Mhm.
There's really a lack. And how would you recommend, someone like me advocating for more community-based organizations?
Well, some places have a community center already. Not everywhere you go does. But community centers, or they call them like rec centers, recreational centers, for a lot of places, that can be just a hub of community. That is where people gather, whether it's to volunteer or they do drives for things, raising money. Kids can do sports or other activities. Um, and I think that if you don't have one of those, you could look around and say, like, is there a place even that's a public space, like libraries? Libraries are also really great places for community. You know, in a library, right, they do way more than just books. Librarians are incredibly knowledgeable about a lot of things. Some of them are even trained to administer Narcan, for people who might be having substance use or overdose or addictions. Um, I think about those spaces as places where you might be able to start a book club or even just meet others. They already sometimes have planned activities. A lot of people rely on them to use computers. And so that in itself is another way, I think, of building community. So looking at what is already available where you live and what's not, and in the places where you don't have those things, where are some shared spots? places where people could gather. In some communities, it's a park. In other places, it might be a coffee shop, like a local coffee shop that is willing to host even like an open mic night or a book club. And part of that, I think, is being able to work up the courage to ask people that work at those places, hey, if something is not available, am I able to start something? Would I be able to do that? And as much as I like having people go out in, public and meet people, I also understand that that's not something that everybody can do. And that's why having virtual platforms like book clubs and stuff is also really important. And then, it's a little bit more accessible for people.
Looking my mic is being dumb. Looking back, what's one thing that you wish you'd known earlier about identity or community?
I think something I wish I knew better about, I guess, identity is what does it mean to have an identity, and that it's not just the ways in which I show up and support other people. It also is about me and the things that I find interesting and the way that I, let's say, use some of the gifts that I feel like I have, like creativity. And in terms of community, just the importance of having people who might not even necessarily be my friends, but people that I see that would notice, for example, like you mentioned with the dog part, if I wasn't coming out into the community. Like even the bank, the local bank that I go to, they know me because I'm there often, for the fact that I'm a small business owner. And it's funny because it's like, oh, like over the past 2 years, they've gotten to know my name. And so now they know me when I pull up and they say hello and everything. And it's not, again, like they're my friends or they're anybody that I would probably, be getting to know beyond that, but they're still part of the community. And I know their names and I can say hello when I see them. So I think I would like to have had a better understanding of the different levels and degrees of community.
What final message would you like to leave our listeners about the importance of embracing their identity and finding their community?
I would say it can be scary at times and it can feel defeating sometimes as well, especially when you try something new, whether it's meeting someone new or a new activity, and it doesn't go the way that you had hoped it to. But there's also still a lesson, I think, to be learned from those experiences. And it usually means that we're getting closer to finding the things that we really do like to do. If I had tried pottery and I had felt like, oh, this wasn't really for me, I'm having a hard time grasping this, I don't have to stick with it, right? If I given it enough time, I could always move on and try something else. And I think that's also some of the fun. The fun, what makes it fun to build identity is the idea of trying new things. You know, Sometimes when you're younger, you're not encouraged to do that, depending on the community you live in or your family and friends. But as an adult, we have much more, I think, of an opportunity to do those things. So take the risk and try building community and try different activities. And usually those two things will get you both.
Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing with us, being on another episode of the podcast. Where
Thank
can
you.
we find you on the internet so we can be a part of your community?
So I have my Instagram for my DBT practice. It's the DBT Center of Media. You can follow me there. I will post full memes and things I find funny, but also I post about skills or concepts that, are mental health related specifically, usually with DBT.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you. It's been
Thank
a
you for
great
having
episode.
me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I think everybody's gonna really love this episode. It's been really insightful and I've learned a lot. And now I have more skills to build
Awesome.
my little community so that
I'm
I'm
glad to hear that.
conscientious. Thank
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that listened.
you. Bye.
the end of every episode, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new feeling and how it correlates to trauma. Let's spin this wheel, shall we? It was a good spin. Ooh. Disappointed, repugnant. Ooh. Disapproval, revolted, disappointed. Disappointed. We can feel really disappointed because of our reactions due to the trauma. When we feel triggered by something else and we have a heightened reaction, it can often cause us to feel shame or guilt or remorse because of that reaction. I was just on the phone. I was just on the phone with a friend, and I was talking to him about something, and he got triggered by what I said because he asked, "Oh, how much money does this person make that these two people are getting married?" And I'm like, I don't know. Why should she care? And he went on a tangent about how when you get married, you should sign a prenup because you don't want to be left high and dry like his mother was. And that really made me think of, we all have these reactions to certain things. And I felt really disappointed in myself for reacting the way that I did because I was very dismissive of how he felt. And that wasn't okay. So I felt upset with myself, which is good. It's good to catch it in the moment and correct it. We have these feelings of shame, remorse, guilt for a reason. As a society, we develop these emotions to be able to recognize when we've done something wrong or when something wrong has happened to us and be able to cope with it and move forward. If you like what we're doing here on the Trauma Dump podcast, don't forget to hit that like button, comment down below what do you want to see more from this podcast, and subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate the show. That really helps us out a lot. If you wish to support the podcast in a different way, maybe monetarily, we have a Patreon. Different tiers can get you a bracelet. That's a handmade bracelet made by me, Grace, like this one. I have a rose quartz bracelet right here with a little rose quartz heart and Swarovski crystals. Any support helps us out a lot. So if you feel compelled to, please like, subscribe, comment down below, and share the show. Thank you so much. Remember, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise again from the ashes and be filled with peace, hope, love, joy, and understanding. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a peaceful and productive day. Goodbye.